pregnant German shepherd, was surrounded and mocked by a group, the baby's next move. Melted every heart. What happened next will leave you speechless. Like, share, and comment below where you're watching from. The story you're about to listen to will change how you see courage forever. Thunder crashed against the windows of the small house on Maple Street like angry fists demanding entry. Sarah wiped her hands on her kitchen towel, glancing nervously at the storm raging outside. The power had flickered twice already, and the wind was getting stronger by the minute. "Mommy, someone's crying." 5-year-old Ethan stood by the living room window, his small palm pressed flat against the cold glass. His breath fogged the surface as he peered into the darkness beyond their front yard. "It's just the storm, sweetie," Sarah called from the kitchen, but something in her son's voice made her pause. There was an urgency there she'd never heard before. "No, Mommy, listen." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "Someone's really crying. They're scared." Sarah's husband Mike looked up from his newspaper, rain pelting harder against the roof. "Probably just the wind through the trees, buddy. Storms make all kinds of weird noises." But Ethan pressed his face closer to the window, his breath coming in short puffs. His small shoulders tensed. "Daddy, please, I can feel it. Someone needs help." The way he said it sent a chill down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the storm. Ethan had always been different, sensitive in ways that sometimes startled adults. He could sense when people were upset before they even showed it. Teachers called it emotional intelligence. Sarah called it a gift that sometimes felt like a burden for such a young child. "Ethan, come away from the window," she said gently. "The storm will pass soon." "But they're crying, Mommy." Tears began rolling down his cheeks. "I can hear them. They're so scared and no one's helping." Mike folded his newspaper with a sigh. The boy wasn't going to let this go. "All right, let's take a look." He walked over to where Ethan stood, still pressed against the glass. The storm had turned their usually quiet street into something from a horror movie. Trees bent at impossible angles, rain slashed sideways, and visibility was nearly zero. "See? Nothing out there but—" Mike stopped mid-sentence. Through the sheets of rain and darkness, he caught a glimpse of something. Movement. Near the edge of their property where the woods began. "What is that?" Sarah joined them at the window, squinting into the storm. Ethan's small finger pointed toward a cluster of dark shapes barely visible through the downpour. "There. Do you see them now?" Mike grabbed the flashlight from the emergency kit. "Stay here with Mommy." "No!" Ethan's voice was fierce, startling both parents. "I'm coming with you. They need me." There was something in the boy's tone that made Mike pause. Not the whining of a child, wanting his way, but the determination of someone who knew something the adults didn't. Sarah knelt down, placing her hands on Ethan's shoulders. "Honey, it's dangerous out there. The storm—" "They're more scared than I am," Ethan interrupted, his eyes wide but resolute. "I have to help them." Mike looked at his wife, then at his son, 5 years old and ready to walk into a storm for someone he'd never even seen clearly. Where did courage like that come from? "All right," Mike said finally, "but you stay right beside me. No running ahead, no matter what we find." They grabbed raincoats and stepped into the chaos outside. The wind nearly knocked Ethan off his feet, but Mike caught his small hand, holding tight. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness in wild arcs as they made their way toward the woods. "This way," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the storm, but he moved with purpose, as if following some invisible thread. As they got closer, voices became clear above the wind, not crying, laughing, cruel, mocking laughter that made Mike's blood run cold. "Look at the pathetic thing. Bet those puppies won't even survive the night. Should have been put down months ago." Mike's flashlight beam found them first, a group of teenagers huddled under a large oak tree, completely oblivious to the approaching father and son. They were pointing at something on the ground, their faces twisted with cruel amusement. Then the light found what they were mocking. A German shepherd, heavily pregnant, lay chained to the base of the tree. Her coat was matted and dirty, her breathing labored. A thick metal chain was wrapped around her neck, the links cutting into her fur where she'd tried to pull free. Her dark eyes reflected the flashlight beam, and in them was a pain so deep it took Mike's breath away. "Get away from her!" Ethan's small voice cut through the storm like a blade. The teenagers turned, surprised. One of them, a boy who couldn't be more than 16, sneered. "Mind your own business, kid. This isn't your problem." "She's pregnant and you're hurting her." Tears streamed down Ethan's face, but his voice never wavered. "Stop it right now." The boy stepped forward, intimidating despite his age. "Or what? You gonna call your daddy?" That's when something extraordinary happened. Without warning, without any fear for his own safety, 5-year-old Ethan broke free from his father's grip and ran straight toward the chained dog. Mike's heart stopped as he watched his tiny son throw himself between the teenagers and the helpless animal. "You want to hurt her?" Ethan spread his small arms wide, shielding the dog with his body. "You have to go through me first." The teenagers stared in shock. Here was this little kid, soaked to the bone, standing up to them like some tiny guardian angel. The pregnant dog lifted her head slightly, looking at Ethan with something that looked almost like recognition. "Kid's crazy," one of the teens muttered, but the boy who'd been doing most of the taunting wasn't backing down. "Move, brat! This dog's nothing but trouble. Should have been dead already." Ethan knelt down beside the German shepherd, placing his small hand gently on her head. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into his touch, a soft whimper escaping her throat. "Her name's not nothing," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying despite the storm. "Her name is Hope, and she's going to be okay now." The dog, Hope, looked up at him with eyes that seemed to understand every word. In that moment, something passed between the boy and the animal, a connection that made the teenagers' laughter die in their throats. Mike found his voice. "That's enough. All of you, get out of here. Now." The lead teenager opened his mouth to argue, but something in Mike's tone made him think twice. Plus, there was something unnerving about watching a 5-year-old show more courage than all of them combined. "Whatever, man. Dog's gonna die anyway." The group started to disperse, but the leader turned back one more time. "Don't say we didn't warn you. That thing's more trouble than it's worth." As their voices faded into the storm, Mike knelt beside his son and the chained dog. Up close, he could see how bad her condition really was. The chain had rubbed raw wounds around her neck. Her belly was swollen with puppies that could arrive any moment. Her ribs showed through her matted fur. "We have to get this chain off," Mike said, examining the heavy lock that held it in place. "I'll stay with her," Ethan announced, settling more comfortably beside Hope. "She's scared." Mike looked at his son, this amazing little boy who just faced down a group of teenagers to protect a stranger, and felt his heart swell with pride and fear in equal measure. "The lock's going to require bolt cutters. I need to go back to the house." "I'm not leaving her." Ethan's tone was final. "Ethan, son, it's not safe. She needs me." The boy looked up at his father with eyes far older than his 5 years. "She's going to have her baby soon. I can feel it. She can't be alone anymore." As if to confirm his words, Hope shifted uncomfortably, a low whine escaping her throat. Her breathing had become more labored in just the few minutes they'd been there. Mike felt torn between protecting his son and recognizing that somehow, impossibly, the boy was exactly where he needed to be. "All right, but if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call out for me. I'll be back in 5 minutes." Ethan nodded solemnly. "We'll be okay, won't we, Hope?" The dog's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but acknowledgement. She was listening to him. As Mike ran back toward the house through the storm, he glanced back once to see his son sitting beside the chained dog, one small hand resting on her head, both of them silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. It was an image that would stay with him forever. But what he didn't see was the dark figure that had been watching from deeper in the woods. A man who stepped out from behind a tree as soon as Mike disappeared, his eyes fixed on the boy and the dog. A man who pulled out a cell phone and dialed a number. "Yeah, it's me," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "We've got a problem. Someone found her." There was a pause as he listened to the voice on the other end. "No, not someone. Some kid. And he's not backing down." Another pause. "I know what you said about keeping this quiet, but this changes things." The man's eyes never left Ethan and Hope as he spoke. "We might need to move up our timeline." Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out the rest of his conversation. But his intent was clear in the way he watched them, like a predator planning his next move. Back at the tree, Ethan felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Hope lifted her head, alert, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the flashlight's beam. "It's okay, girl," Ethan whispered, though his own voice trembled slightly. "Daddy's coming back. We're going to help you and your babies." But as another flash of lightning illuminated the woods, both boy and dog saw the same thing, a shadow moving between the trees, watching them. Hope's lips pulled back slightly, the faintest hint of a growl rumbling in her throat. Not at Ethan, but at something else, something dangerous lurking just beyond their sight. Ethan pressed closer to her, his small arms wrapping around her neck as gently as possible. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise." In the distance, they could hear Mike returning with the tools needed to free her. But they could also sense something else approaching through the storm, something that would test every ounce of courage the little boy had shown so far. The real danger was just beginning. Mike's footsteps pounded against the muddy ground as he raced back through the storm, bolt cutters gripped tightly in one hand, emergency blankets tucked under his other arm. The wind had gotten stronger, turning the rain into needles that stung his face. But all he could think about was getting back to Ethan and that poor dog. When the beam of his flashlight finally found them again, his heart nearly stopped. Ethan had somehow managed to position himself even closer to Hope, his small body curved protectively around her swollen belly. The dog's breathing had become more rapid, more labored, and even in the dim light, Mike could see the strain in her dark eyes. "How is she?" Mike called out as he approached, trying to keep his voice calm despite the growing urgency he felt. "She's scared, Daddy," Ethan replied without looking up from Hope's face. "Her babies want to come out, but she's trying to be brave, just like you taught me." Mike's throat tightened at his son's words. At 5 years old, Ethan understood more about courage and compassion than most adults ever would. He knelt beside them, examining the heavy chain more closely under the flashlight's beam. "This is going to make some noise," Mike warned, "but it's the only way to get her free." Hope seemed to understand. As Mike positioned the bolt cutters around the chain link closest to the lock, she pressed her muzzle against Ethan's small chest, as if drawing strength from his presence. The first cut sent sparks flying, the sharp crack of metal echoing through the storm. Hope flinched but didn't pull away. Ethan's small hand stroked her head steadily. "It's okay, Hope. Daddy's helping. We're getting you free." The second cut was harder. The chain was thick, designed to hold much larger animals than a pregnant dog. Mike's hands were already cramping from the effort, rain making everything slippery and difficult. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. "Almost there, buddy." "No, Dad, look." Mike followed his son's gaze toward the woods. At first he saw nothing but darkness and rain. Then lightning flashed, and for just a moment, he caught sight of a figure standing between the trees, tall, motionless, watching them. "Who is that?" Mike's voice was barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. In the next flash of lightning, it was gone. "I don't know," Ethan said quietly, "but Hope doesn't like him. She keeps looking that way and getting upset." As if to confirm his words, Hope let out a low, warning growl, not at them, but toward the spot where the figure had been standing. Her maternal instincts were clearly in overdrive, sensing a threat to both herself and her unborn puppies. Mike worked faster on the chain, adrenaline sharpening his focus. Whatever was going on here, whoever had chained this dog in the woods during a storm, they needed to get her to safety quickly. The third cut finally did it. The chain fell away with a heavy thud, and Hope immediately tried to struggle to her feet. But her pregnant belly and weakened condition made it impossible. "Easy, girl," Mike soothed, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's help you." Together, father and son managed to get Hope standing, though she swayed dangerously on her feet. Mike quickly wrapped one of the emergency blankets around her, while Ethan supported her head. "We need to get her to the house," Mike said. "She's going into labor, I can tell." They began the slow journey back, Hope leaning heavily against Mike's legs with each step. Ethan walked alongside her head, one small hand maintaining constant contact, whispering encouragements that seemed to give her strength. "You're doing so good, Hope. Just a little bit further. We're going to take care of you and your babies." But they'd only made it halfway across the yard when Hope suddenly stopped, her whole body tensing. A low whine escaped her throat, and she looked up at Ethan with eyes that clearly communicated distress. "Daddy, something's wrong," Ethan said urgently. Mike knelt down beside Hope, his hands gentle as he examined her. Even with his limited veterinary knowledge, he could tell she was in active labor. Her breathing had become panting, and she was trying to lie down despite their efforts to keep her moving. "The babies are coming now," Mike said, his mind racing. "We're not going to make it to the house." "Then we stay with her here," Ethan announced with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possess when facing a crisis. "Ethan, it's still storming. She needs shelter, warmth." "She needs us," Ethan interrupted. "Right here, right now. We can't make her wait." As if to prove his point, Hope finally gave up trying to walk and carefully lowered herself to the muddy ground. Her breathing became even more rapid, and she began the ancient process that had been repeating itself for thousands of years. Mike looked around desperately. They were still 50 feet from the house, caught in the open during a thunderstorm, with a dog about to give birth. This wasn't exactly the controlled environment he'd hoped for. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "We do this here. Sarah," he called toward the house, his voice carrying over the storm. "Sarah, we need help." The front door burst open, and Sarah appeared with a large umbrella and armload of towels. She took one look at the situation and immediately understood. "How many babies?" she called as she ran toward them. "We don't know yet," Mike replied, "but it's happening fast." Sarah positioned the umbrella to provide what shelter she could, while Mike used the extra blankets to create a makeshift birthing area. Ethan never moved from Hope's head, his small hands stroking her ears, while he whispered constant reassurances. "My mom had a baby before me," Ethan told Hope conversationally, as if they were sitting by a fireplace instead of in the middle of a storm. "She said it hurt a lot, but then she got me, so it was worth it. Your babies are going to be worth it too." Hope's dark eyes focused on the boy's face, and for a moment, her panting seemed to ease slightly. There was something almost mystical about the connection between them, as if the dog understood every word and drew comfort from his presence. The first puppy arrived quickly, a small, dark bundle that Hope immediately began cleaning with fierce maternal devotion. Ethan watched in amazement, his eyes wide with wonder. "He's so tiny," he whispered. "And look, he's trying to breathe." The puppy's first cries were weak but unmistakable. Hope nudged him closer to her warmth, then looked up at her human helpers as if to say, "One down, but we're not finished yet." The second puppy came 20 minutes later, this one lighter in color, with markings that were already visible, even in the dim flashlight beam. This little one seemed stronger, crying louder, and immediately beginning to search for food. "Two healthy puppies," Sarah said softly, using a towel to help clean the second one while Hope focused on the first. "How many more do you think?" "German Shepherds usually have between 5 and 9 puppies," Mike replied, remembering something he'd read years ago. "So, we could be here a while?" As if she'd heard him, Hope suddenly tensed again, her breathing becoming more labored. But something was different this time. Something was wrong. The third puppy was taking much longer to arrive, and Hope seemed to be struggling more than she had with the first two. Her whines became more desperate, and she kept looking up at Ethan as if asking for help. "Daddy, she's scared," Ethan said, his own voice trembling now. "Something's wrong with this baby." Mike gently examined Hope, trying to see what was happening. What he found made his heart sink. The puppy was positioned wrong, making delivery nearly impossible without assistance. "We need to get her to a vet," he said quietly to Sarah. "Now." But before Sarah could respond, Ethan spoke up again. "Number. She doesn't want to move. And we can help her here." The boy's voice held a certainty that surprised all of them. "Hope, look at me." The dog turned her exhausted eyes toward Ethan, and he placed both of his small hands gently on either side of her muzzle. "I know you're tired, I know it hurts, but you're the bravest mommy in the whole world, and your baby needs you to be strong just a little bit longer. Can you do that for your baby?" Hope's breathing seemed to slow slightly, her eyes locked on Ethan's face. Then, with what appeared to be tremendous effort, she pushed again. This time, the puppy emerged, but it wasn't moving. "Oh no," Sarah breathed. The tiny puppy lay motionless, its body limp and unresponsive. Hope immediately began trying to stimulate it, licking frantically, nudging it with her nose, but there was no response. "Is he dead?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Mike examined the tiny puppy carefully. There was a heartbeat, barely perceptible, but the little one wasn't breathing on its own. "Not yet," Mike said grimly, "but close." Without hesitation, Ethan reached for the puppy. "Can I hold him?" "Ethan, I don't think—" "Please, Daddy, I want to try something." Something in his son's tone made Mike pause. He carefully placed the motionless puppy in Ethan's small hands, watching as the boy brought the tiny bundle close to his chest. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked softly. "Sharing my heart," Ethan replied simply. He held the puppy against his chest, over his heart, and began to hum very softly. It was a melody Sarah recognized, the lullaby she used to sing to Ethan when he was a baby. "Come on, little guy," Ethan whispered. "You have to wake up. Your mommy needs you, your brother and sister need you, and I need you too." He continued humming, rocking slightly. The puppy pressed close to his warm chest. Hope watched anxiously, her dark eyes moving between her motionless baby and the boy who was trying so hard to help. Minutes passed. The storm continued to rage around them, but somehow, under Sarah's umbrella, with flashlight beams creating a small circle of warm light, it felt as though they were in their own protected world. Then, impossibly, the puppy stirred. A tiny paw moved, then a soft whimper. Then suddenly, the little one was crying with the same vigor as its siblings. "He's alive!" Ethan laughed through his tears, gently returning the puppy to Hope. He just needed to know someone cared about him. Hope immediately pulled her third baby close, cleaning him with renewed energy. The puppy responded by nursing alongside its siblings, as strong and healthy as if nothing had ever been wrong. "I've never seen anything like that," Mike said quietly, staring at his son in amazement. "Neither have I," Sarah agreed. "Ethan, how did you know what to do?" Ethan shrugged, his attention already back on Hope and her babies. "I don't know. I just felt like he was cold and scared and needed to know someone loved him." The fourth puppy arrived without complications, followed by the fifth. Each birth brought renewed amazement from the small audience, and hope seemed to grow stronger with each successful delivery rather than weaker. But as they waited to see if more puppies would arrive, the storm began to intensify again. The wind picked up, making it harder for Sarah to keep the umbrella positioned properly. Lightning flashed more frequently, and the thunder was getting closer. "We need to get them inside," Mike said. "The storm's getting worse, and Hope needs rest." They carefully gathered the new family, Hope and her 5 healthy puppies, and began the final journey to the house. Hope walked slowly but steadily, stopping frequently to check on her babies, which Mike carried in a blanket-lined basket. Ethan walked beside her, one hand resting lightly on her back, still talking to her in that gentle, reassuring tone he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "You did so good, Hope. Your babies are beautiful. Wait until you see them in the light. They're going to be the smartest, bravest puppies ever, just like their mommy." As they reached the front porch, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Mike, look." She was pointing toward the road, where a dark car was parked just beyond the reach of their porch light. It hadn't been there when they first went outside, and with the storm, they hadn't heard it arrive. "Who would be out in this weather?" Sarah asked quietly. The car's engine was running, windshield wipers moving back and forth, but they couldn't see inside due to the tinted windows and the storm. "Probably someone taking shelter from the storm," Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. Something about the car's presence felt wrong, too coincidental, too deliberate. As they watched, the car's headlights flashed once, then twice, a signal of some kind. Hope noticed the car too, and immediately became agitated. She pressed closer to Ethan, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Her maternal instincts were clearly warning her of danger. "Get them inside," Mike said urgently. "Now!" They rushed through the front door, Mike carrying the basket of puppies, while Ethan stayed close to Hope. Once inside, Sarah quickly closed and locked the door behind them. But as she turned off the porch light and peered through the front window, the dark car was gone, disappeared as suddenly and quietly as it had arrived. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah said quietly. "First that person watching from the woods, now a strange car. Mike, what if whoever chained Hope up is looking for her?" Mike had been thinking the same thing. "We need to call someone. The police, animal control, someone." "No," Ethan said firmly. Both parents turned to look at their son, who was sitting on the living room floor beside Hope. She had settled on the blankets they'd arranged for her, with all 5 puppies nursing contentedly. "Ethan, we have to report this. Someone abused Hope, and now they might be trying to get her back." "They won't take her," Ethan said with quiet determination. "I won't let them." "Son, this isn't a game. These people could be dangerous." Ethan looked up at his father, his young face serious beyond his years. "I know they're dangerous, Daddy. That's why Hope needs us. She's not just any dog. Someone really bad hurt her and wanted her babies to die. But we saved them, and now we're her family." As if to agree, Hope lifted her head and looked directly at Ethan, her dark eyes filled with what could only be described as gratitude and love. "See, she knows she's safe now, and I'm going to make sure she stays safe." Mike and Sarah exchanged glances. Their 5-year-old son had just delivered 5 puppies in a thunderstorm and somehow brought one back from the brink of death through sheer willpower and compassion. He'd shown courage that most adults would never possess. But he was still just a little boy, and if the people who had chained Hope were truly dangerous, determination alone wouldn't be enough to protect her. Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the street. For just a moment, in the distance, they could see the dark car parked at the far end of the block, watching, waiting. The real test of Ethan's promise was about to begin. The storm finally began to calm around midnight, but inside the house on Maple Street, nobody was sleeping. Hope had settled into a comfortable routine with her 5 puppies, who were nursing peacefully on the soft blanket Sarah had arranged by the fireplace. The warm glow of the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of safety and comfort that felt almost sacred after the chaos of the night. Ethan had refused to leave Hope's side. He'd changed into dry pajamas but positioned himself right next to her on the floor, one small hand resting gently on her back while she tended to her babies. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but every time Sarah or Mike suggested he go to bed, he shook his head firmly. "I told her I wouldn't leave her alone," he said simply. "She's been alone too long already." Mike sat in his armchair nearby, supposedly reading a book, but actually watching his son with a mixture of pride and concern. What Ethan had done tonight was extraordinary, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they were all in danger. The mysterious figure in the woods, the car that had appeared and disappeared, none of it felt like coincidence. Sarah emerged from the kitchen with warm milk for Ethan and coffee for herself and Mike. As she handed Mike his mug, she whispered, "I keep checking the windows. That car hasn't come back, but I have this terrible feeling we're being watched." "I know," Mike replied quietly. "Tomorrow we're calling the police. This whole situation feels wrong." But Ethan had heard them. "We're not giving Hope away," he said without looking up from the puppies. "I don't care who comes looking for her." "Ethan, honey," Sarah said gently, settling down beside him on the floor. "Sometimes adults have to make hard decisions to keep everyone safe." "Hope is safe here," Ethan insisted. "Look at her." And indeed, Hope looked more content than she probably had in months. Her breathing was steady and relaxed, her dark eyes alert but peaceful as she watched over her nursing puppies. Occasionally she would lift her head to look at Ethan, and her tail would move just slightly. Not quite a wag, but acknowledgement and gratitude. "She trusts us," Ethan continued. "She knows we're her family now. If we give her away, we'll be breaking our promise just like all the other people who hurt her." The simple wisdom in his words hit both parents hard. This wasn't just about a stray dog anymore. It was about integrity, loyalty, and what it meant to keep your word to someone who had no voice of their own. Around 2 a.m, Ethan finally fell asleep, curled up next to Hope with his arm draped protectively over her neck. She seemed to understand that he needed rest and remained perfectly still, unwilling to disturb the boy who had saved her life. Mike carefully covered his son with a blanket, then settled back into his chair to keep watch. Sarah had gone upstairs to try to get some sleep, but Mike knew he wouldn't be able to relax until morning came, and they could figure out their next steps. It was just after 3 when the phone rang. Mike grabbed it quickly, not wanting to wake Ethan or disturb Hope and her puppies. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello?" he answered quietly. "You have something that belongs to me." The voice was cold, unfamiliar, with an edge that made Mike's blood run cold. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "You know who this is, and you know what I want." There was a pause. Then the voice continued with quiet menace. That dog is valuable property. Those puppies even more so. You're interfering with business." Mike felt his heart rate spike, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me. I saw the whole thing tonight. Cute kid you've got there, by the way. Real brave. Be ashamed if something happened to him." The threat against Ethan sent rage coursing through Mike's veins. "You stay away from my family. We found an abused, abandoned dog, and we helped her. End of story." "That's where you're wrong." The voice became even colder. "That dog is part of a breeding operation worth more money than you make in a year. Those puppies have bloodlines that people pay serious cash for, and you just cost me a very expensive delivery. So you're the one who chained her up in the woods during a storm?" Mike couldn't keep the disgust out of his voice. "I'm the one who owns her, and tomorrow you're going to return my property along with all the puppies, or this gets ugly. We're calling the police." The man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Go ahead. I've got papers showing ownership, legal bills of sale, documentation going back 3 generations. You've got nothing but a sob story about finding a stray." Mike's heart sank. If this man really had legal ownership documents, the police might have no choice but to return Hope to him. "But here's the thing," the voice continued. "I'm a reasonable businessman. Those puppies are worth about $2,000 each on the market. 5 puppies, that's 10 grand. You keep the dog. She's too old and used up to be worth much more to me anyway. I'll take the puppies and we'll call it even." "Absolutely not." "Then you'll lose everything. The dog, the puppies, and probably face charges for theft. Think about it. Is your kid's little rescue fantasy worth destroying your family over?" The line went dead. Mike stood in the dark living room, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about an abused dog anymore. This was about organized animal abuse, illegal breeding operations, and people who saw living creatures as nothing more than profit margins. He looked down at Ethan, still sleeping peacefully next to Hope, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. His son had shown more compassion and courage tonight than most people displayed in a lifetime. There was no way Mike was going to let some criminal destroy that innocence. But the man's threat had been clear, and if he really did have legal ownership papers, their options were limited. Mike quietly made his way upstairs to wake Sarah. She needed to know what they were dealing with. "Sarah," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder, "we need to talk." She was awake instantly, alert in the way parents develop when their children are in potential danger. "What happened?" Mike explained the phone call, watching his wife's face grow pale in the dim light from the hallway. "He threatened Ethan." Sarah's voice was barely controlled fury. "Indirectly, but yes." "Then we call the police. Right now?" "He says he has ownership papers, legal documentation." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Mike, even if he does own Hope legally, what he was doing to her was animal abuse. Chaining a pregnant dog outside during a storm, leaving her to give birth alone. That's criminal, regardless of ownership. But would that be enough to let us keep her? I don't know, but we have to try." They went back downstairs together, moving quietly to avoid waking Ethan. Hope lifted her head as they approached, sensing their tension. Her dark eyes moved between them, alert and questioning. "It's okay, girl," Sarah whispered, gently stroking her head. "We're going to figure this out." As if summoned by her words, one of the puppies began crying, a tiny, plaintive sound that immediately brought Hope's attention back to her babies. She shifted slightly, helping the little one find the right position to nurse, her maternal instincts taking over, despite her own exhaustion. "Look at her," Sarah said softly. "Look how gentle she is with them, how protective. This isn't the behavior of an animal that's been raised just for breeding. She's got personality, intelligence, love to give." Mike nodded, but his mind was racing with practical concerns. "We need a lawyer, someone who knows animal law." "At 3 in the morning? First thing tomorrow, then. And we need to document everything, her condition when we found her, the chain marks around her neck, the fact that she was abandoned during a storm." "I took pictures," Sarah said quietly. "While you were cutting the chain, I thought they might be important later." Mike looked at his wife with renewed appreciation. Even in the chaos of the moment, she'd been thinking ahead. They spent the next hour making plans, researching animal protection laws on Mike's laptop, and trying to figure out their legal options. But as dawn began to creep through the windows, they still didn't have any clear answers. That's when Ethan woke up. He stirred slowly, blinking in the early morning light, then immediately turned his attention to Hope and her puppies. All 5 babies were sleeping peacefully, tiny bellies round with milk. "Did everyone sleep okay?" he asked, his young voice still thick with sleep. "Everyone's fine," Sarah assured him. "How about you? You must be sore from sleeping on the floor." Ethan stretched and yawned, then carefully sat up to avoid disturbing Hope. "I'm okay. Hope needed me here." As if she'd heard her name, Hope lifted her head and looked directly at Ethan. Her tail moved slightly, still not quite a full wag, but more animated than it had been the night before. "She looks better," Ethan observed, happier. And she did. The terrible fear and pain that had been in her eyes when they first found her was gone, replaced by something that looked like cautious hope. The wounds around her neck were still visible, but her breathing was steady and strong. "Ethan," Mike said, carefully, "we need to talk to you about something." Something in his father's tone made Ethan look up sharply. "Is something wrong? Are Hope and her babies sick?" "No, they're all healthy, but there might be people who want to take them away from us." Ethan's expression immediately became serious, older than his 5 years. "The bad people who chained her up?" "Yes. They called last night and said Hope belongs to them." "But that's not true," Ethan said with absolute certainty. "Hope belongs with us now. She chose us." "Sometimes the law doesn't work that way, buddy. Sometimes people can own animals even if they don't treat them well." Ethan considered this for a moment, his small brow furrowed in thought. Then he looked down at Hope, who was watching the conversation with alert intelligence. "Hope," Ethan said seriously, "do you want to go back to those people?" As if she understood the question, Hope's ears flattened against her head, and she pressed closer to Ethan's side. A low whine escaped her throat, not the sound of a dog in physical pain, but the sound of fear and distress. "See," Ethan said, looking back at his parents. "She doesn't want to go, and we promised we'd keep her safe." Before Mike or Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the front door. All 3 family members froze. It was barely 7 in the morning, too early for normal visitors, especially after the storm. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Stay here with Hope," Mike whispered to Ethan and Sarah. "Don't come out no matter what happens." Mike made his way to the front door, his heart pounding. Through the peephole, he could see 2 figures on the porch, a tall man in an expensive coat and a woman in a business suit, both carrying official-looking folders. He opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Patterson?" the man asked. "I'm Vincent Morrison, and this is Ms. Chen from Animal Control. We're here about a dog you picked up last night." "How did you know my name?" Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's a small town, Mr. Patterson. Word gets around quickly when someone interferes with private property. I found an abused animal and provided emergency care. I hardly think that qualifies as interference." "That's actually what we're here to discuss," Ms. Chen interjected, her voice professionally neutral. "Mr. Morrison has filed a report claiming that his dog was stolen from his property last night." "Stolen?" Mike couldn't keep the incredulity out of his voice. "She was chained to a tree in the woods during a thunderstorm, about to give birth." "My property extends into those woods," Morrison said smoothly. "The dog was secured in a designated area for whelping. It's a common practice in breeding operations." "Chaining a pregnant dog outside during a storm is a common practice?" "Mr. Patterson," Ms. Chen interrupted, "regardless of your feelings about Mr. Morrison's methods, if he can prove ownership, we're legally obligated to return the animal to him." Morrison opened his folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. Registration papers, breeding records, veterinary records going back 3 years. "This dog's name is Bella, registration number GS4472. She's a valuable breeding female worth approximately $8,000. Mike scanned the papers quickly. They looked legitimate, complete with official seals and signatures. His heart sank. "What about the condition we found her in?" "The chain marks around her neck." "Mr. Patterson," Morrison's voice took on a patronizing tone, "I understand you're not familiar with professional breeding operations. Sometimes animals require restraint for their own safety. Pregnant females can be unpredictable. She was terrified and in labor, which is exactly why she needed to be in a controlled environment. Your interference put both the mother and puppies at risk. Ms. Chen looked uncomfortable with Morrison's explanations, but she kept her voice professional. Mr. Patterson, I'm going to need to see the dog and assess her current condition. Mike felt trapped. If he refused, they'd likely return with a warrant. If he complied, they might take Hope, Bella, immediately. The puppies were born last night, he said finally. They're only hours old. Moving them now could be dangerous. All the more reason to get them back to proper facilities as quickly as possible, Morrison said. I have a veterinary clinic set up specifically for newborn care. Something about the way he said it made Mike's skin crawl. This wasn't about the welfare of the animals. It was about money and control. I'll need to see my family first, Mike said. This has been traumatic for my son. Of course, Ms. Chen said. But Mr. Patterson, I want to be clear. If these documents are legitimate, we will be taking the animals today. Mike closed the door and leaned against it, his mind racing. In the living room, he could hear Ethan's voice, still talking quietly to Hope. When he returned to his family, Sarah took one look at his face and knew the news wasn't good. They have papers, Mike said quietly. Official registration, breeding records, they look legitimate. Ethan looked up from where he was sitting with Hope, his young face stricken. They're going to take her? They're going to try? No. Ethan's voice was firm, with a determination that surprised all of them. I won't let them? Ethan, honey, sometimes... No, Mommy. Ethan stood up, positioning himself between his parents and Hope. I made a promise. We all made a promise. And Hope trusts us. As if to reinforce his words, Hope struggled to her feet, leaving her puppies for the first time since they'd been born. She moved to stand beside Ethan, pressing against his side, and for the first time since they'd found her, her tail wagged, just once, but unmistakably. In that moment, looking at his 5-year-old son standing protectively beside the dog they had rescued, Mike made a decision that would change all their lives. Then we fight, he said quietly. We get a lawyer, we document everything, and we fight for her. Mike, Sarah whispered, if those papers are real, then we prove that ownership doesn't give someone the right to abuse an animal. We prove that what we found last night was criminal neglect, regardless of who legally owned her. Ethan looked up at his father with shining eyes. Really? We're going to keep Hope? We're going to try our best, buddy, but it won't be easy. The knock on the door came again, more insistent this time. Mr. Patterson, we know you're in there. We need to see the dog now. Mike looked at his family, his brave son, his supportive wife, and the dog who had somehow become the center of everything. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Coming, he called out, then turned to Ethan. Remember, buddy, no matter what happens, you did the right thing last night. You saved her life and the lives of her puppies. Nobody can take that away. Ethan nodded solemnly, then knelt down beside Hope and whispered something in her ear. Her tail wagged again, stronger this time. As Mike walked back toward the front door, he could only hope that love and determination would be enough to overcome legal documentation and official intimidation. The real battle for Hope's freedom was about to begin. Mike opened the front door slowly, steeling himself for what was to come. Morrison stood on the porch with an air of smug confidence, while Miss Chen from Animal Control looked increasingly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Behind them, Mike noticed a large white van parked at the curb, the kind used for transporting animals. Mr. Patterson, Morrison said without preamble, I believe we've wasted enough time. I need my property returned immediately. The dog and puppies are in a delicate state, Mike replied carefully. Any movement could be dangerous for newborns. Which is exactly why they need professional care, Morrison countered. Amateur handling has already put them at risk. Ms. Chen stepped forward, her clipboard ready. Mr. Patterson, I need to examine the animals and assess their condition. This is standard procedure in ownership disputes. Mike had no choice but to step aside and let them enter. As they walked into the living room, he prayed that Ethan would remember their conversation about staying calm no matter what happened. The scene that greeted them was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Hope was lying on her side by the fireplace, 5 tiny puppies nursing contentedly. Ethan sat cross-legged beside her, one small hand resting gently on her back. Sarah knelt nearby with a bowl of water, monitoring the new family's condition. But the moment Morrison entered the room, everything changed. Hope's head snapped up, her ears flattening against her skull. A low growl rumbled in her throat, not aggressive, but warning. Her whole body tensed, and she immediately began trying to gather her puppies closer to her body. Interesting, Ms. Chen observed quietly, making notes on her clipboard. The animal appears to be exhibiting fear responses to your presence, Mr. Morrison. Nonsense, Morrison replied dismissively. She's just protective of her litter. It's normal behavior. But Hope's reaction was clearly more than normal maternal protection. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, and she kept looking between Morrison and Ethan as if seeking reassurance from the boy. "Hey, Hope," Ethan said softly, his voice steady despite the tears beginning to form in his eyes. "It's okay. I'm right here." At the sound of Ethan's voice, Hope's trembling eased slightly, though she never took her wary eyes off Morrison. "The dog's name is Bella," Morrison said sharply, "not Hope, and she needs to be properly handled by someone who understands her value." "Her value?" Sarah couldn't keep the disgust out of her voice. "She's a living creature, not merchandise. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're emotionally attached, but this is a business matter. That dog represents years of careful breeding, genetic planning, and significant financial investment." Ms. Chen was examining Hope from a distance, noting the visible chain marks around her neck, her overall condition, and her behavior. "Mr. Morrison, can you explain these injuries around the animal's neck?" "Routine restraint marks. Sometimes breeding females require containment for their own safety and the safety of their offspring." "During a thunderstorm," Mike interjected, "while she was in active labor?" Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The timing was unfortunate, but sometimes nature doesn't follow human schedules." "So you admit you left a pregnant dog chained outside during a severe storm?" Ms. Chen's pen was moving rapidly across her clipboard. "I admit that professional breeding sometimes requires difficult decisions that emotional amateurs don't understand." Ethan had been listening to this exchange with growing anger. Finally, he stood up and faced Morrison directly. "You heard her," he said, his young voice clear and accusatory. "She was scared and alone and having her babies, and you just left her there." Morrison looked down at the 5-year-old with barely concealed irritation. "Son, you don't understand adult business." "I understand that you're mean to animals," Ethan replied without backing down. "And Hope doesn't want to go with you. Look at her." Indeed, Hope had pressed herself as close to Ethan as possible, while still protecting her nursing puppies. Her eyes remained fixed on Morrison with unmistakable fear and distrust. Ms. Chen was clearly troubled by what she was observing. "Mr. Morrison, while your documentation appears to be in order, I'm seeing significant indicators of animal distress and possible neglect." "The dog is fine," Morrison snapped, "and those puppies need proper veterinary care that these people can't provide." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "we've already contacted Dr. Martinez at the Meadowbrook Veterinary Clinic. She's coming to examine them this afternoon." This was news to Mike, but he caught on quickly. "Dr. Martinez has 30 years of experience with large breed dogs and specializes in neonatal care." Morrison's confident facade flickered for just a moment. "That's unnecessary. I have my own veterinary team." "I'm sure you do," Ms. Chen said diplomatically. "But given the unusual circumstances of this case, I think an independent veterinary assessment would be beneficial for all parties." "What unusual circumstances?" Morrison's voice had taken on an edge. "I've provided complete documentation of ownership. The law is clear." "The law is also clear about animal welfare standards," Ms. Chen replied firmly. "And what I'm seeing here raises questions that need to be answered before any animals are transferred." Mike felt a surge of hope. Ms. Chen wasn't just rubber-stamping Morrison's claims, she was actually investigating. Morrison pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney. This is harassment and illegal detention of my property." As Morrison stepped outside to make his call, Ms. Chen knelt down near Hope, careful not to get too close to the protective mother. "She's beautiful," Ms. Chen said softly, "and those puppies are thriving. You've done excellent work caring for them." "Ethan did most of it," Sarah said proudly. "He stayed with her through the entire birth, even helped revive one of the puppies." Ms. Chen looked at Ethan with new respect. "That's quite an accomplishment for someone your age." Hope needed help, Ethan said simply. And now she needs us to protect her from the bad man. Ethan, Ms. Chen said gently, can you tell me exactly what you saw last night when you found Hope? Ethan's recounting was detailed and heartbreaking. He described the teenagers mocking Hope, the heavy chain cutting into her neck, her labored breathing and obvious distress. But what seemed to affect Ms. Chen most was his description of Hope's emotional state. She was so scared and sad, Ethan said, his voice becoming softer, like she thought nobody would ever help her. But when I talked to her, she started to trust me. And now she's not scared anymore, except when the bad man is here. Ms. Chen was taking extensive notes. And you said there were other people there? Teenagers. They were being mean to her, Ethan nodded. Throwing things and laughing at her. They said she should have been dead already. This detail clearly shocked Ms. Chen. They said what? Mike corroborated Ethan's account, adding details about the condition they had found Hope in and the difficulty of removing the chain. I took photographs, Sarah added, of the chain, the injuries, the location where we found her. I'll need copies of those, Ms. Chen said immediately. Morrison returned from his phone call, his expression darker than before. My attorney is on his way. This delay is costing me money and potentially endangering valuable animals. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Chen said, her voice now carrying official authority. I'm placing a temporary hold on the removal of these animals pending a full investigation into their care and treatment. On what grounds? Evidence of potential animal abuse, witness testimony regarding negligent treatment, and the animal's observable distress in your presence. Morrison's calm mask finally slipped completely. This is ridiculous. I have legal ownership. Ownership doesn't supersede animal welfare laws, Ms. Chen replied firmly. If these allegations prove to be true, your ownership rights could be terminated and criminal charges could be filed. Allegations from a 5-year-old child and some bleeding heart neighbors who don't understand professional breeding. Allegations supported by physical evidence, photographic documentation, and expert veterinary assessment, Ms. Chen corrected, plus the testimony of multiple witnesses regarding the condition these animals were found in. Ethan had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. Does that mean Hope gets to stay with us? It means she gets to stay safe while we figure out what's best for her and her puppies, Ms. Chen explained gently. But Morrison wasn't finished. You're making a serious mistake. I have connections in this county, political influence you can't imagine. This investigation will disappear, and I'll have my property back within 24 hours. The threat was clear, and it sent a chill through the room. But before anyone could respond, Ethan stepped forward again. Hope isn't property, he said with quiet dignity. She's a mother who loves her babies, and we love her too. That has to count for something. Ms. Chen looked down at this remarkable little boy who had shown more courage and compassion than most adults, then at Hope, who was watching the proceedings with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. It counts for everything, she said softly. And I promise you, I'm going to make sure Hope and her babies are protected. Morrison's phone rang again. He answered it curtly, then his expression changed dramatically. Whatever news he was receiving clearly wasn't what he'd expected. What do you mean, frozen? He said into the phone. How can the accounts be frozen? He stepped outside again, his voice rising as he continued the conversation. Through the window, they could see him pacing angrily on the front porch. What's happening? Sarah asked Ms. Chen. I can't be certain, but it sounds like someone else is investigating Mr. Morrison's operations. When Morrison returned, his confident demeanor was completely gone. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. There seems to be some sort of misunderstanding, he said carefully. Perhaps we can work out an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Ms. Chen asked suspiciously. The dog is old, past her prime breeding years. She's not as valuable to me as she once was. Perhaps the family could purchase her, and we could discuss the puppies separately. Mike felt his anger flare. You want us to buy a dog you abused? I want to resolve this matter quickly and quietly, Morrison replied, for everyone's benefit. No, Ethan said firmly. Hope doesn't belong to you anymore. She belongs with us. Morrison knelt down to Ethan's eye level, his voice becoming artificially gentle. Son, You don't understand how expensive it is to care for a dog like this. The food, the veterinary bills, the space she needs. Your parents can't afford. We'll figure it out, Ethan interrupted. That's what families do. And what about her puppies? 5 German Shepherd puppies require enormous amounts of care, training, socialization. Are you prepared for that responsibility? For the first time, Ethan hesitated. He looked at the 5 tiny puppies nursing contentedly, then up at his parents. The magnitude of what they were taking on was beginning to sink in. We'll help them find good homes, Sarah said firmly. People who will love them and take care of them properly. People who will pay top dollar for purebred German Shepherds, Morrison asked with a knowing smile. Because that's what these puppies are worth, thousands of dollars each. That's not why we're doing this, Mike said quietly. Isn't it? Morrison stood up, his confidence returning. You've just inherited $30,000 worth of animals. Are you telling me that's not attractive? We're telling you that we don't see dollar signs when we look at Hope and her babies, Sarah replied firmly. We see living creatures who deserve love and protection. Morrison laughed bitterly. How noble and completely unsustainable. Do you have any idea what it costs to feed and care for 6 large dogs? The veterinary expenses alone will bankrupt you within a year. Ethan looked up at his parents with worried eyes. Is that true? Are we too poor to take care of Hope? Mike knelt down beside his son. Ethan, taking care of animals is expensive, and yes, 6 German Shepherds would be more than we could handle long term. But that doesn't mean we're abandoning Hope. We'll make sure she and her babies are safe and loved, even if they can't all stay with us. But Hope stays, Ethan said firmly. She stays with us forever. If that's what's best for her, then yes. Morrison was watching this exchange with calculating eyes. What if I made you a different offer? Keep the mother. She's not worth much to me anyway. But let me take the puppies. I'll pay you fair market value for them. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. Why not? You get to keep the dog your son is attached to, you get compensated for your trouble, and the puppies go to people who understand their value. Their value as breeding machines, you mean? Mike said with disgust. Their value as purebred German Shepherds with championship bloodlines, Morrison corrected. These aren't just pets, they're the future of the breed. Ms. Chen had been listening to this entire exchange with growing alarm. Mr. Morrison, are you running a puppy mill operation? I run a legitimate breeding business with proper licensing and veterinary oversight. Then you won't mind if we inspect your facilities as part of this investigation. Morrison's face went white. That won't be necessary. As I said, perhaps we can reach an alternative arrangement. The only arrangement I'm interested in, Ms. Chen said firmly, is ensuring the welfare of these animals. And based on what I've seen and heard today, I'm recommending that they remain in their current location while we conduct a full investigation of your operation. You can't do that. I have rights. So do these animals, Ms. Chen replied. And right now, their rights are my primary concern. Morrison stood in the middle of the living room, clearly frustrated and running out of options. His confident facade had crumbled completely, revealing someone who was used to getting his way through intimidation and legal maneuvering. This isn't over, he said finally. I have lawyers, political connections, resources you can't imagine. I will get my property back. Your property, Ethan said quietly, doesn't want to go with you. As if to prove his point, Hope struggled to her feet again and moved protectively in front of her puppies, positioning herself between them and Morrison. Her message was clear. She would fight to protect her babies from this man. Morrison stared at the dog he'd claimed to own, and for a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then his expression hardened again. We'll see about that, he said, then turned and walked out of the house. Through the window, they watched him get into the white van and drive away. But as the vehicle disappeared down the street, Mike noticed another car following at a distance, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Ms. Chen, Mike said quietly, I think there's more to this situation than just one man's breeding operation. She nodded grimly. I'm beginning to think you're right. And that makes Hope and her puppies more than just animals in need of protection. It makes them evidence in what could be a much larger investigation. Ethan was sitting beside Hope again, gently petting her head while she settled back down with her puppies. What does that mean? He asked. It means, Sarah said, sitting down beside her son, that Hope is going to be staying with us for a while longer. Good, Ethan said with satisfaction, because I told her she was home now, and I always keep my promises. As if she understood, Hope's tail wagged once more, stronger than before. For the first time since they'd found her, she looked truly at peace. But outside, parked just beyond their line of sight, the dark sedan waited and watched. The battle for Hope might have been won, but the war was far from over. 3 hours after Morrison's departure, the house on Maple Street had settled into an uneasy calm. Dr. Martinez had arrived as promised, conducting a thorough examination of Hope and her 5 puppies. Her findings were both encouraging and deeply troubling. The mother is in remarkable condition considering what she's been through, Dr. Martinez explained to the gathered family as she packed up her equipment. Her milk production is excellent, and all 5 puppies are healthy and thriving. But these chain marks, she indicated the raw wounds around Hope's neck. These are consistent with prolonged restraint, probably weeks or months of being chained. Ethan sat cross-legged beside Hope, one small hand resting on her back as she nursed her babies. Will the marks go away? The physical ones will heal, Dr. Martinez said gently. But dogs remember trauma, especially intelligent breeds like German Shepherds. She may always be fearful of chains or confinement. She won't have to worry about that here, Sarah said firmly. Dr. Martinez smiled. I can see that. The bond she's formed with your son is extraordinary. In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've rarely seen such immediate trust between an animal and a child. As if to demonstrate the point, Hope lifted her head and gently licked Ethan's hand, her dark eyes filled with contentment and gratitude. Dr. Martinez, Mike said carefully, we may need you to testify about Hope's condition and treatment. There could be legal proceedings. I'd be happy to, she replied without hesitation. What I've documented today is clear evidence of neglect and abuse. No responsible breeder would allow an animal to reach this condition. After Dr. Martinez left, the family tried to establish some normalcy. Sarah prepared lunch while Mike caught up on work emails, but both parents found themselves frequently checking the windows for any sign of the mysterious sedan or Morrison's return. Ethan, meanwhile, had appointed himself Hope's personal guardian. He'd moved his pillow and blanket to the living room floor and showed no intention of leaving her side. Honey, Sarah said gently, you need to eat something and maybe take a shower. I can't leave Hope, Ethan replied matter-of-factly. What if she gets scared? What if her babies need something? Hope knows how to take care of her puppies, Mike assured him. She's been doing it all morning. But what if the bad man comes back? She needs to know I'm here to protect her. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. Their 5-year-old son had developed a fierce protectiveness that was both admirable and concerning. He'd been through a traumatic experience himself, witnessing animal abuse and confronting adult threats, yet he seemed more worried about Hope's emotional state than his own. Tell you what, Sarah suggested, why don't we bring your lunch in here? You can eat while keeping Hope company. Ethan considered this compromise and nodded. Okay, but I'm not going upstairs, not until I know she's really safe. As Sarah went to prepare a tray, Mike settled into his armchair with his laptop, ostensibly working, but actually researching everything he could find about animal protection laws and breeding regulations. What he discovered was disturbing. Morrison's breeding operation, which went by the name Premier Bloodlines, had been the subject of several complaints over the past 2 years. Former employees had reported overcrowded conditions, inadequate veterinary care, and dogs being kept in almost constant confinement. But somehow, all the investigations had been closed without charges being filed. Political connections, Mike murmured, remembering Morrison's threat from earlier. What's that? Sarah asked, returning with a sandwich and juice box for Ethan. I'm reading about Morrison's business. There have been multiple complaints, but nothing ever sticks. He seems to have friends in high places. Sarah's expression darkened. Well, he doesn't have friends here, and he's not getting Hope back. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. Mike tensed immediately, but through the window he could see it was Ms. Chen, alone this time. Good afternoon, she said when Mike opened the door. I hope I'm not intruding, but I have some important information to share. Of course, come in. Ms. Chen entered and immediately noticed Ethan still stationed beside Hope and her puppies. How is everyone doing? The vet says they're all healthy, Ethan reported proudly. Hope is being a really good mommy. I can see that. Ms. Chen smiled, then turned to address the adults. I wanted to update you on our investigation. We executed a search warrant on Morrison's property this afternoon. Mike and Sarah both leaned forward intently. What we found was extensive. 23 adult dogs in various stages of pregnancy or nursing, kept in conditions that barely meet minimum legal standards. Many showed signs of inadequate veterinary care, poor nutrition, and psychological stress. 23 dogs, Sarah breathed. That's just what we found in the main facility. We suspect there may be satellite locations we haven't discovered yet. What happens to all those dogs? Ethan asked, his young voice filled with concern. They're being temporarily relocated to foster homes and animal shelters while we complete our investigation. Many will need extensive rehabilitation, both physical and emotional. Mike was processing the implications. So Morrison was running a large-scale puppy mill. That's what the evidence suggests, but here's where it gets more complicated. Ms. Chen's expression became grave. Morrison isn't the real owner of Premier Bloodlines. The business is owned by a corporation called Apex Holdings, which is itself owned by another company, which traces back to a network of similar operations across 3 states. A puppy mill empire, Sarah said with disgust. Exactly. And Hope, or Bella, as she was registered, wasn't just any breeding dog. According to the records we seized, she was one of their most valuable animals. Her puppies were pre-sold for extremely high prices to buyers who may not have known about the condition she was kept in. Ethan's hand tightened protectively on Hope's back. So, lots of people wanted her babies? Yes, but not necessarily for good reasons. The prices being charged suggest these puppies were destined for further breeding operations, not family homes. Mike felt a chill. You're saying Hope's puppies were going to end up in the same situation she was in? Very likely. It's a cycle that perpetuates itself. High-value breeding animals producing offspring that become the next generation of breeding machines. But not anymore, Ethan said firmly. Hope's babies are going to have good homes with people who love them. Ms. Chen smiled at his determination. That's exactly what we're going to ensure. But I need to warn you, this investigation is going to attract attention from some very powerful people. Morrison was just a middle manager. The real owners of this operation have significant resources and political influence. Are we in danger? Sarah asked directly. Honestly, I don't know, but Hope is a key piece of evidence in this case. Her condition when you found her, combined with Dr. Martinez's documentation, provides crucial proof of the systematic abuse happening at these facilities. So she can't go back to Morrison, Mike stated. Morrison no longer has any legal claim to her. He was essentially an employee, not an owner. And even if he did, the evidence of abuse would terminate any ownership rights. Ethan beamed. So Hope gets to stay with us forever? That's ultimately up to your parents and the court system. But given the circumstances, I think there's an excellent chance Hope will be staying right here. For the first time since the ordeal began, the family felt a sense of real hope. But Ms. Chen's next words tempered their relief. However, I need you to be very careful over the next few weeks. Document everything. Any strange phone calls, unfamiliar cars in the neighborhood, anyone asking questions about Hope or the puppies. This organization has shown they're willing to use intimidation and legal pressure to protect their interests. As if summoned by her words, Hope suddenly lifted her head, alert and tense. A low growl rumbled in her throat as she stared toward the front window. "What is it, girl?" Ethan asked, following her gaze. Mike peered through the curtains and felt his heart skip. The dark sedan was back, parked across the street. This time, a man in an expensive suit was standing beside it, talking on a phone while watching their house. "Ms. Chen," Mike said quietly, "I think we have company." She joined him at the window and immediately reached for her radio. "This is Chen requesting immediate backup at 847 Maple Street. We have potential witness intimidation in progress." The man by the sedan noticed the activity in the window and quickly got back into his car. But instead of driving away, he simply moved to a different location down the street, still visible and still clearly watching. "Who is that?" Ethan asked, his voice small for the first time since the ordeal began. "Someone who works for the people who hurt Hope," Sarah explained gently. "But he can't come in here, and he can't take her away." "Why is he watching us?" Ms. Chen knelt down to Ethan's level. Sometimes, when bad people get caught doing bad things, they try to scare the good people who help stop them. But we have police officers coming to make sure you're safe. Ethan considered this, then looked down at Hope, who was still tense and alert. Hope doesn't like him either. Indeed, Hope's reaction was unmistakable. Even from this distance, even through the walls of the house, she sensed something threatening about the man in the sedan. Her maternal instincts were in overdrive, and she had positioned herself more protectively over her puppies. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived, their presence immediately causing the sedan to drive away. Officer Rebecca Torres, whom Mike recognized from the local community meetings, approached the house while her partner pursued the suspicious vehicle. Ms. Chen filled me in on the situation, Officer Torres said after introductions. We're going to maintain increased patrols in this area for the next few days. Has anyone made direct threats against your family? Mike recounted Morrison's phone call from the night before, including the veiled threat against Ethan. Officer Torres took detailed notes and assured them that such intimidation tactics were being taken seriously by law enforcement. The good news, she added, is that this investigation has reached the state level. The Attorney General's office is now involved, which means these people can't rely on local political connections to make problems disappear. As the afternoon wore on, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Ms. Chen received updates from the ongoing search of Morrison's facilities, each report more damning than the last. Hidden cameras had captured evidence of systematic abuse. Financial records showed the massive profits being generated, and computer files revealed a network of similar operations across the region. Hope was scheduled to be retired after this litter, Ms. Chen reported grimly. At 4 years old, she was considered too old for further breeding. Retired how? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. The records indicate she would have been euthanized. The cost of feeding and housing non-productive animals was considered too expensive. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. They were going to kill her? But they didn't, Mike said firmly, pulling his son close. Because you heard her crying and insisted we help her. You saved her life, buddy. We all saved her, Ethan said quietly. And now she's safe forever. As evening approached, the family established a new routine around Hope and her puppies. Sarah prepared dinner, while Mike continued researching legal precedents for their situation. Ethan remained at his post beside Hope, reading her stories from his picture books and providing a constant, comforting presence. The puppies, meanwhile, were thriving. They'd grown noticeably even in their first day of life, their tiny cries becoming stronger and more demanding. Hope attended to them with the devoted attention of a mother who finally felt secure enough to focus entirely on her baby's needs. Look, Ethan said excitedly, pointing to the smallest puppy. That's the one I helped when he wasn't breathing. Now he's the loudest one. Indeed, the puppy Ethan had revived was now the most vocal of the litter, crying loudly whenever he wanted attention and pushing his way to the front during feeding time. What should we name him? Sarah asked. Ethan thought for a moment. Brave, he announced, because he was brave enough to come back to life. And the others? Ethan studied each puppy carefully. That one's lucky because she's lucky to have such a good mommy. That one's strong because he's the biggest. She's smart because she always knows where to find the milk. And he's... Ethan paused, looking at the last puppy, who was contentedly nursing while the others squirmed around him. He's happy. Those are perfect names, Mike said, settling into his chair with a cup of coffee. For the first time in 24 hours, the house felt peaceful, but peace was shattered by the sudden, insistent ringing of the doorbell. Not a polite knock or single ring, but repeated, aggressive chiming that sent Hope into immediate alert mode. Mike approached the door cautiously, checking the peephole. What he saw made his blood run cold. Morrison was back, but he wasn't alone. 2 large men in expensive suits flanked him, their postures suggesting they weren't just lawyers or business associates. Behind them, 3 black SUVs were parked in the driveway and street. Sarah, Mike called quietly, get Ms. Chen on the phone, now. The doorbell continued ringing, then stopped. Morrison's voice came through the door, artificially calm, but carrying an unmistakable threat. Mr. Patterson, we need to talk. Open the door, please. I'm calling the police, Mike replied. The police can't help you with this. This is a federal matter now. We have federal marshals here with a court order for the immediate seizure of stolen property. Mike's heart sank. Federal marshals meant federal jurisdiction, which trumped local. Animal control and state investigators. If Morrison's organization had managed to get federal law enforcement involved, their options had just become much more limited. "Daddy," Ethan's voice was small and frightened. "Are they going to take Hope?" Mike looked at his son, sitting protectively beside the dog they had all come to love, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Not if I can help it," he said quietly. The banging on the door grew louder, more insistent. Outside, powerful people with unlimited resources were demanding the return of what they considered their property. Inside, a 5-year-old boy sat beside a rescued dog and her 5 newborn puppies, representing everything good and innocent in a world that too often valued profit over compassion. The final battle for Hope's freedom was about to begin, and this time, the stakes couldn't be higher. Sarah frantically dialed Ms. Chen's number, while Mike stood frozen at the door, his mind racing through their limited options. The banging continued, growing more aggressive with each passing second. "Ms. Chen, they're here," Sarah said breathlessly into the phone. Morrison's back with federal marshals and court orders. Through the phone's speaker, they could hear Ms. Chen's sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible. Federal jurisdiction requires specific interstate commerce violations. We haven't—" Her voice was cut off by another voice in the background, urgent and concerned. The banging stopped suddenly, replaced by Morrison's voice, now carrying the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to count to 10. Then we're coming in whether you open this door or not. 1, 2. Mike looked back at his family. Sarah stood near the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale but determined. Ethan remained beside Hope, both hands now resting protectively on her back as she instinctively curled more tightly around her nursing puppies. 3, 4. "Daddy!" Ethan's voice cut through the tension, clear and unwavering despite his obvious fear. "I'm not moving. Ethan, these men have legal papers. We might not have a choice." 5, 6. "There's always a choice," Ethan replied with wisdom far beyond his 5 years. "Hope chose to trust us. Now, we have to choose to protect her." 7, 8. Mike felt something shift inside him. His son was right. Legal papers, federal marshals, corporate power. None of that mattered more than doing what was right. They'd found an abused animal and given her safety and love. They'd helped bring 5 healthy puppies into the world. They'd provided sanctuary for a mother who had never known kindness before. 9. Mike turned the deadbolt and opened the door. Morrison stood on the threshold, flanked by 2 men who definitely weren't federal marshals. Their suits were expensive, but their posture and cold eyes suggested they were more accustomed to intimidation than law enforcement. Behind them, the 3 black SUVs sat in the driveway like a small invasion force. "Mr. Patterson," Morrison said, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Thank you for being reasonable." "Where are the federal marshals?" Mike demanded. "There was a miscommunication, but these gentlemen represent the legal interests of Apex Holdings, the rightful owners of the stolen property currently in your home." "You mean Hope and her puppies?" "I mean valuable breeding stock worth approximately $50,000 that was unlawfully removed from its designated location." One of the suited men stepped forward, pulling out a leather folder. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Thomas Kellerman, legal counsel for Apex Holdings. We have court documents ordering the immediate return of stolen property." Mike examined the papers quickly. They looked official, complete with seals and signatures, but something felt wrong about them. "These documents are dated today," Mike observed. "How did you get a court order so quickly?" "Emergency injunction," Kellerman replied smoothly. "Theft of property valued over $25,000 qualifies for expedited processing." From behind Mike, Sarah's voice carried a note of triumph. "Ms. Chen says those documents are fake. She's contacted the court that supposedly issued them, and they have no record of any such order." Morrison's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "There must be some administrative confusion, but the underlying legal principles remain." "The underlying legal principle," interrupted a new voice from behind the SUVs, "is that you're committing fraud." Everyone turned to see Ms. Chen approaching with 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Chen continued as she reached the porch, you're under arrest for filing false legal documents, intimidation of witnesses, and violation of a protective order issued this afternoon prohibiting you from approaching these premises. This is ridiculous, Morrison sputtered. I have every right to recover my stolen property. You have no rights here, the woman with the briefcase said firmly. I'm Assistant Attorney General Patricia Reeves, and as of this afternoon, Hope and her puppies are under state protection as evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation. Kellerman stepped forward aggressively. You have no authority to interfere with lawful recovery of private property. Actually, Assistant Attorney General Reeves replied calmly, I have every authority. The investigation into Apex Holdings and its subsidiary companies has revealed evidence of racketeering, animal abuse on an industrial scale, and tax evasion totaling over $2 million. Hope, formerly known as Bella, is a key piece of evidence in this case. Mike felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The second suited man, who had remained silent until now, pulled out his own phone and made a brief call. Within moments, Mike could hear sirens approaching from the distance. Backup? Ms. Chen asked with concern. Different kind of backup, the man replied with a cold smile. The sirens grew louder, and soon two more official-looking vehicles pulled up to the house. Men in federal agency jackets emerged, their badges clearly visible. This is Agent David Park, FBI, the lead agent announced. We have a federal warrant for the seizure of evidence in an ongoing interstate trafficking investigation. Assistant Attorney General Reeves frowned and examined the warrant carefully. This is a legitimate federal document, she admitted reluctantly. But, Agent Park, this case is already under state jurisdiction. What's the federal interest? Apex Holdings has operations in 7 states, Agent Park explained. The interstate commerce violations fall under federal jurisdiction. We need to take custody of all evidence, including the animals in question. Mike's heart sank. Federal jurisdiction trumped state authority, and these agents looked far more legitimate than Morrison's fake documents. But before anyone could respond, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He was small, just 5 years old, still wearing his pajamas from the night before. But as he stood in the doorway facing down a crowd of adults, some legitimate law enforcement, some criminals, all of them with more power than one little boy, his presence commanded attention. "Excuse me," Ethan said politely, his voice carrying clearly despite his nervousness. All conversation stopped. Federal agents, state officials, corrupt businessmen, and local police all turned to look at this tiny figure who had somehow inserted himself into their adult world of warrants and jurisdictions and legal maneuvering. "My name is Ethan Patterson, and I'm 5 years old," he continued with the careful pronunciation of a child who wanted to make sure every word was understood. "Last night, I heard someone crying in the storm. My parents said it was just the wind, but I knew someone needed help." Agent Park started to speak, but something in the boy's demeanor made him stop and listen. "We found Hope chained to a tree while she was having her babies. There were mean teenagers throwing things at her and saying she should be dead. She was scared and hurt and alone." Ethan's voice began to tremble slightly, but he pressed on. "I told Hope that she wasn't alone anymore. I promised her that we would keep her safe and take care of her babies. And Hope believed me. She trusted me." The boy looked directly at Agent Park, his young eyes serious and unwavering. "Agent Park, do you know what it means to break a promise to someone who trusts you?" The federal agent, a man who had spent 15 years dealing with hardened criminals and complex investigations, found himself unable to answer immediately. "Because I know," Ethan continued. "It means you hurt them, and Hope has been hurt enough already." Morrison tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to let a child—" "Shut up," Agent Park said quietly, never taking his eyes off Ethan. "Go on, son. Hope isn't evidence. She's not property. She's a mommy who loves her babies and wants to keep them safe. And her babies aren't things you can just take away. They're brave and lucky and strong and smart and happy, and they need their mommy." Ethan paused, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I know you adults have papers and laws and important things, but Hope can't read papers. She can only understand love and kindness and whether people keep their promises to her." The boy took a step forward, his small frame somehow seeming larger despite being surrounded by adults. "So, I'm asking you, Agent Park. Please don't break my promise to Hope. Please don't take her away from the first place she's ever felt safe. The silence that followed Ethan's words was profound. Even Morrison seemed stunned by the child's eloquence and courage. Agent Park knelt down to Ethan's eye level, his expression thoughtful. Ethan, you understand that sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions based on laws and regulations? I understand that laws are supposed to protect people who can't protect themselves, Ethan replied. Hope can't protect herself from bad people with papers, but we can protect her. Agent Park was quiet for a long moment, studying this remarkable little boy who had just delivered the most compelling argument he'd heard in years of law enforcement. Would you like to show me Hope and her puppies? Agent Park asked finally. Ethan's face lit up with cautious hope. You want to meet them? I think that would help me understand the situation better. Ethan led Agent Park into the living room, followed by the entire crowd of officials and civilians. Hope looked up nervously as the strangers entered her sanctuary. But when she saw Ethan, her tail moved slightly in greeting. Hope, this is Agent Park, Ethan said seriously. He's here to decide if you get to stay with us. Agent Park knelt down several feet away from Hope, observing her behavior carefully. What he saw was a dog who was alert but not aggressive, protective of her puppies but not hostile to humans, and clearly bonded to the boy beside her. Tell me about last night, Agent Park said quietly. Ethan recounted the entire story, from hearing the cries during the storm to helping deliver the puppies to reviving the one who wasn't breathing. As he spoke, Hope seemed to sense that this conversation was important. She remained calm but watchful, occasionally looking between Ethan and the federal agent. This puppy here, Ethan said, gently pointing to the smallest one. His name is Brave. He wasn't breathing when he was born, but I held him against my heart and told him someone loved him, and he came back to life. Agent Park looked at the thriving puppy, then at the boy who had saved him, then at the mother dog who trusted this child more than any adult in the room. Agent Park, Assistant Attorney General Reeves said carefully, federal jurisdiction is clear, but perhaps there's a way to handle this that serves both law enforcement needs and animal welfare. What are you suggesting? Protective custody. The animals remain here under federal protection while the investigation proceeds. This house becomes a temporary federal facility, with the family serving as caretakers under official supervision. Morrison exploded. This is insane! You can't just declare someone's house a federal facility. Actually, Agent Park said slowly, we can. Under the RICO statute, when property is evidence in an ongoing investigation, we have broad authority to determine how that evidence is preserved and protected. Kellerman stepped forward threateningly. You're making a serious mistake. Apex Holdings has political connections you can't imagine. This interference will cost you your career. Agent Park stood up, his expression hardening. Mr. Kellerman, are you threatening a federal agent in the course of his official duties? I'm simply pointing out the political realities. You're threatening me, in front of witnesses, while your client is already facing federal charges. Agent Park turned to the uniformed officers. Please escort Mr. Kellerman and his associates off the property. They're no longer welcome here. As Morrison and his team were led away, Agent Park turned back to the family. This arrangement is highly unusual, he admitted, but the circumstances are unusual as well. So Hope gets to stay? Ethan asked hopefully. Hope and her puppies will remain here under federal protection while we build our case against Apex Holdings. Your family will serve as official caretakers, with regular check-ins from federal agents. Sarah found her voice. For how long? The investigation could take months, but given the evidence we're gathering, it's likely that by the time it's complete, Hope's legal status will be resolved permanently in your favor. Ethan threw his arms around Agent Park's legs. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for reminding me why I became a federal agent in the first place, Agent Park replied, gently patting the boy's head. To protect people who can't protect themselves. As the officials departed and the house returned to relative quiet, the family gathered around Hope and her puppies. The immediate crisis had passed, but they all understood that their lives had changed forever. Ethan, Mike said quietly, what you did today was incredibly brave. I just kept my promise, Ethan replied simply. That's what you and Mommy taught me to do. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. You're right. and we're all going to keep that promise together. As night fell over Maple Street, Hope nursed her 5 puppies in the warm glow of the fireplace, surrounded by the family who had saved her life and fought for her freedom. Outside, federal agents maintained a discreet watch, ensuring that no one would ever again threaten the safety of this remarkable mother and her babies. Ethan curled up on his blanket beside Hope, one small hand resting on her back as she settled into peaceful sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the investigation continued, but tonight, promises had been kept, and love had triumphed over power. In the weeks that followed, the story of the 5-year-old boy who saved a pregnant dog and stood up to federal agents spread across social media and news outlets. People from around the world sent donations to help with Hope's care and the costs of raising 5 German Shepherd puppies. Local veterinarians volunteered their services, and families applied to adopt the puppies when they were old enough. But most importantly, Hope thrived. The wounds around her neck healed, her fear diminished, and her trust in humans was restored through the daily kindness of the family who had kept their promise to protect her. The investigation into Apex Holdings resulted in the rescue of over 200 dogs from deplorable conditions, the arrest of 15 individuals involved in the operation, and new federal legislation strengthening penalties for large-scale animal abuse. Morrison was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. Kellerman and his associates faced charges for fraud and intimidation. And the dark sedan that had watched the house, it belonged to private investigators hired by Apex Holdings to identify and intimidate witnesses. They too faced federal charges. But perhaps the most remarkable outcome was the transformation of 5 puppies who grew up in a home filled with love instead of a breeding facility designed only for profit. Brave, lucky, strong, smart, and happy, each found families who treasured them as companions rather than commodities. Hope remained with the Patterson family, officially adopted through federal proceedings that recognized her as a victim of abuse rather than stolen property. She became a certified therapy dog, visiting children's hospitals and schools, where her gentle nature and remarkable story inspired countless others. And Ethan, he grew up understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen when someone needs help, even if the someone can't speak your language. He learned that promises matter, that courage isn't about size or age, and that love really can triumph over power when people are willing to stand up for what's right. The story of Hope and her 5 puppies became a reminder that in a world often dominated by greed and indifference, there are still people willing to risk everything to protect the innocent and vulnerable. Sometimes those people are federal agents and state prosecutors. Sometimes they're veterinarians and animal control officers. And sometimes they're 5-year-old boys who refuse to ignore the sound of someone crying in a storm. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and the animals who trust us to protect them. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories with the world.